Ben Wright watched the other contestants unpack their gear in the preparation bay. Each one laid out their survival equipment with careful precision, checking every function and feature. The Quillen named Tessa had already tested her device 17 times in the last hour. Her 6 legs moved in constant rhythm as she cycled through each mode, her compound eyes reflecting the green glow of successful diagnostics. The announcement had come 3 months ago. The Galactic Survival Academy needed certified survivors before granting colonization rights to any species. Daran 7 waited below them, spinning slowly through the viewport. 30 days alone on that world would prove whether someone could truly survive beyond their home planet's comfort. Only those who passed could lead colony missions or exploration teams. Gren the Bren kept his webbed fingers pressed against his multi-tools display screen. His moist skin glistened under the station lights as he muttered calculations. The device in his hands looked more like a small spacecraft console than a survival tool. Buttons, screens, and sensors covered every surface. He had explained earlier that it could analyze soil composition, filter water through 3 different methods, detect poison in food, measure atmospheric conditions, generate heat, produce light, cut through most materials, and 40 other functions Ben had stopped counting. Across the bay, Lux arranged crystalline instruments with geometric perfection. The Horth's body refracted light into rainbow patterns as they moved. Their survival device extended from a central core with multiple arms, each ending in a different specialized tool. Lux had spent the previous day describing how their people had engineered solutions for every possible survival scenario. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was left to improvisation. Pollen checked each of their 6 limbs, then rechecked the attachments on their device. The Drevni had brought what looked like a mechanical tree with 47 different branches. Each branch held a specific tool for a specific task. There were cutting edges of 5 different sizes, 3 types of drilling mechanisms, 2 kinds of hammers, 4 varieties of measuring instruments, and more Ben couldn't identify. Pollen had actually counted them out loud earlier. 47 exactly. Ben sat on a supply crate near the wall, running a small whetstone along the edge of his knife. The sound of steel on stone created a gentle rhythm in the busy room. The blade was 10 inches long, carbon steel, full-tang construction with a simple wooden handle. His grandfather had made it 60 years ago. Ben had carried it through Canadian wilderness, Australian outback, and African savanna. Now it would go to an alien world. Tessa's antennae swiveled toward him. She approached with precise steps, her device held carefully in her primary grippers. Human Ben Wright, I have completed my equipment inventory. Your item appears to be a simple cutting implement. Where is the rest of your survival gear? Ben held up the knife, letting light run along its edge. This is it. Her translator made a clicking sound that might have been confusion. This single tool? For 30 days on a Category 4 hostile world? That's right. Gren abandoned his screen to join them. His large eyes blinked sideways. Ben, I have reviewed Daran 7's environmental data. The planet has megafauna that can crush stone. Weather patterns shift without warning. Water sources contain 17 types of dangerous microorganisms. You need filtration, protection, shelter construction capability, and I know what I need, Ben said quietly. He stood and slipped the knife into the leather sheath on his belt. I've read the same reports. Lux drifted closer, their crystalline form chiming softly. No disrespect intended toward your species, but perhaps humans do not fully understand modern survival methodology. We have evolved beyond primitive single-function implements. My device can perform 32 distinct operations. I can analyze, construct, and adapt to any situation. Sounds useful, Ben said. Pollen approached last, moving on 4 legs while their upper limbs gestured. The human confuses me. Earth survival instructors are considered adequate by galactic standards. Why would their training lead you to such an illogical choice? Ben picked up his small backpack. Inside was basic clothing, a water bottle, and a fire-starting rod. Nothing electronic. Nothing complex. My grandfather taught me something when I was young. He said the best tool isn't the one that does everything. It's the one that helps you make everything you need. Philosophy will not build shelter, Tessa said. Her tone carried something between concern and pity. Nor will it purify water or signal for rescue. Probably not, Ben agreed. An instructor entered the bay. She was an older Quillen named Ross, her carapace showing the wear of many decades. She had survived 7 different worlds during her certification years. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had truly tested themselves. Attention all contestants. Transport to Daran 7 launches in 1 hour. You will be deployed to separate zones across the planet. Communication devices will only function for emergencies. Your single chosen item must sustain you for 30 standard days. Recovery occurs at designated extraction points on day 30. Questions? Instructor Ross, Tessa said immediately. Should the human not be advised to reconsider their equipment choice? Ross studied Ben for a long moment. Her compound eyes revealed nothing but her antennae tilted forward with interest. Each participant makes their own choice. The challenge reveals whether that choice was wisdom or foolishness. That is the purpose of testing. But a single knife, Pollen began, has been used by humans for thousands of their years, Ross interrupted. Long before any of our species achieved spaceflight, humans survived on their world with such tools. Whether that primitive approach works on Daran 7 remains to be seen. Ben said nothing. He had learned long ago that some lessons couldn't be taught with words. They had to be experienced. The other contestants would understand eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, Ben would do what he had always done. Adapt. Survive. Keep moving forward. Gren returned to his equipment, muttering about human stubbornness. Lux made a chiming sound that probably meant the same thing. Pollen checked their 47 tools one more time, perhaps seeking reassurance in the completeness of their preparation. Tessa remained near Ben. I calculate your survival probability at 12%. That troubles me. You seem competent despite your illogical choice. I appreciate the concern, Ben said, but I'll be fine. How can you possess such confidence with inadequate equipment? Ben smiled and touched the knife at his belt. Because this isn't inadequate. You're thinking of it as just a knife. I'm thinking of it as the first tool, the one that makes all the others possible. Tessa's antennae curled in confusion. Before she could ask another question, Ross called them toward the transport bay. The time for talking had ended. Soon they would descend to Daran 7. Soon the real test would begin. Ben followed the others through the corridor, his hand resting comfortably on the knife handle. He had everything he needed. They just couldn't see it yet. The drop pod hit atmosphere with a violence that rattled Ben's teeth. Fire streaked past the small viewport as Daran 7's gravity pulled him down toward the forest zone. The automated system announced his descent vector in a calm voice that seemed inappropriate for controlled falling. At 500 feet, the parachute system deployed. At 50 feet, retro thrusters fired. Then the pod touched ground with a solid thump. Ben grabbed his pack and knife, then hit the release. The door hissed open to reveal a wall of green. Trees stretched upward at least 200 feet, their trunks wider than his old apartment. The air tasted thick and wet. Somewhere in the canopy, something screamed a challenge that echoed through the forest. Ben stepped out onto alien soil and smiled. Across the planet, Tessa's pod had settled in a rocky highland region. She immediately activated her multi-tool scanning function. The device projected a holographic map of her surroundings, marking water sources, shelter locations, and potential dangers. She cycled through 7 different environmental sensors, collecting data. Her training emphasized information gathering before action. Know everything, then proceed with perfect precision. She pressed a button and her tool's construction beam activated. Bright blue light cut through rock like paper. Within minutes, she had leveled a foundation for her shelter. Another function welded support beams into place. A third created perfectly measured supports. Her device's level indicator ensured everything aligned within 0.03 degrees. 17 functions worked together to build her camp. Then the sky changed. Static crackled across her holographic display. The construction beam flickered and died. Tessa's antennae shot forward in alarm. She cycled through diagnostic modes, but the screen showed cascading errors. Electromagnetic interference, her tool reported. Severe ionization in upper atmosphere. All advanced functions offline until conditions improved. She stood alone in the rocks with a partially completed shelter and a device that no longer worked. In the wetlands, Gren had been cataloging plant species when his multi-tool went silent. The screen went dark. The sensors stopped humming. He pressed every button twice, then 3 times, then frantically a dozen more times. Nothing. The electromagnetic storm had found him too. His moist skin began drying in the wind. Without his tool's environmental readings, he couldn't identify safe water sources. Without the filtration system, he couldn't purify what he found. Panic crept into his chest. Lux's crystalline instrument simply shattered when the electromagnetic pulse hit. The delicate circuitry inside couldn't handle the surge. They stood in their assigned desert zone, surrounded by glittering fragments of their survival device. 32 functions reduced to sharp debris in seconds. Pollen's 47 tools fared better. Most were mechanical rather than electronic. But the ones they needed most, the scanning attachments and analysis instruments, had gone dark. They crouched in a canyon, methodically checking each attachment, finding more failures than successes. Ben worked in the forest, unaware of the others' problems. He had walked for an hour after landing, looking for the right spot. Not too high, not too low, near water but not beside it, visible to sky but protected by trees. His grandfather had taught him to read land like some people read books. Every detail told a story. He found a small clearing near a stream. Good drainage, solid ground, thick trees on 3 sides for wind protection, a rocky outcrop on the 4th that would reflect fire heat. Perfect. Ben drew his knife and approached a young sapling. The blade cut through the trunk in 4 strong strokes. He trimmed the branches, then cut the sapling into 7-foot sections. His movements were efficient, practiced. The knife moved like an extension of his hand. Within an hour, he had 12 poles stacked neatly. Next came bark. He found a dead tree with loose outer layers and used the knife to pry thick sheets free. Each piece was roughly 3 feet long. He split some into strips for cordage by sliding the knife edge along the grain. The fibers separated cleanly. His grandfather had shown him this when Ben was 8 years old. The memory felt close in this alien forest. With poles and cordage, he built a frame. The structure leaned against a fallen log, creating a triangular shelter. He lashed the joints using the bark strips, wrapping and tightening until everything held solid. More bark sheets became the roof, overlapping like scales to shed rain. The whole process took 3 hours. No power source required, no electronic guidance needed. Fire came next. Ben gathered dry twigs and dead grass for tinder. He arranged them in a small pile, then used his fire-starting rod. Sparks fell into the nest. He blew gently until smoke appeared, then flames. The first fire on a new world. He fed it carefully, adding larger sticks as it grew. By sunset, he had a healthy blaze reflecting off the rock outcrop behind his shelter. Water was his next priority. The stream looked clear, but appearances meant nothing. Ben used his knife to cut green wood from a living tree. He shaved away the bark, then split the wood lengthwise. Using the knife point, he drilled a small hole near one end of each piece. With more bark cordage, he lashed them together into a V-shape with the holes aligned. A hollow tube formed where they met. He filled his water bottle and tilted it so water ran through the improvised filter. The green wood wouldn't purify everything, but it removed the largest particles. Then he boiled the water in a container he'd fashioned from birch bark. The knife had stripped the bark in one continuous sheet and he'd folded it into a watertight box. Suspended over fire on green sticks, it held water long enough to reach boiling temperature without burning through. While water boiled, Ben carved. He took a straight branch and shaped one end into a point. The knife removed thin curls of wood with each stroke. In 20 minutes, he had a basic fishing spear. Not fancy but functional. Tomorrow he would make hooks from bone and a proper bow drill for making fire without the starter rod. One tool making many tools. That was the secret they didn't understand. Night fell across Darren 7. Ben sat by his fire, turning a piece of meat on a stick. He had speared a fish from the stream on his first attempt. Not bad for an alien world. The shelter kept the wind out. The fire kept him warm. Water was solved. Food was solved. Day 1 complete. Somewhere across the planet, Tessa sat in her half-finished shelter trying to manually operate functions that required power. The cold wind cut through gaps in her incomplete walls. She had training. She had knowledge. But her device lay silent, and night was very dark without its light function. Gren curled in a muddy hollow, thirsty and frightened. Every sound in the wetland made him jump. His tool was just weight now, useless metal and dark screens. Lux had managed to start a small fire using friction, but their crystalline body was not designed for physical labor. Exhaustion made their light dim. Pollen had found water but couldn't verify its safety. They stared at it, thirsty but afraid. In orbit above, Instructor Ross watched 5 video feeds from monitoring drones. She saw 4 contestants struggling with failed technology. She saw one human sitting peacefully by firelight, carving something new from wood. Her antennae tilted forward with interest. "Curious," she said to the empty observation room. "Very curious indeed." Ben finished his fish and banked the fire for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, under alien stars, he had everything he needed. The knife rested in its sheath beside him, ready. Always ready. Day 8 arrived with rain. Ben woke to water drumming against his bark roof. He stretched, checked that his fire remained protected under its own small shelter, and smiled. The design was working exactly as intended. His grandfather would have approved. He had been busy during the first week. The clearing now held more than just a shelter. A drying rack stood near the fire, loaded with strips of meat from a rabbit-like creature he'd caught in a snare. The snare trigger had taken him an hour to carve, shaping the notches precisely so they would release when disturbed. 5 more snares waited in a line near the game trail he'd found. Beside his shelter sat a collection of tools, a hand axe made by lashing a sharp stone to a wooden handle with hide strips, a wooden mallet carved from a single piece of hardwood, 3 different sizes of wedges for splitting logs, a bow drill set for starting fires, fish hooks carved from bone, a crude but functional bow with arrows fletched using feathers and hide glue he'd boiled from fish parts. Everything had started with the knife. Every tool was a child of that first blade. He'd used it to shape the axe handle, split the bone for hooks, carve the bow, sharpen the stone edges, process the hides. The knife itself showed wear now, but nothing serious. He maintained it carefully, stropping the edge on smooth leather every evening. In the orbital station, Instructor Ross reviewed footage from all 5 contestants. The monitoring drones captured everything. She watched Tessa struggling to build a fire using sticks and stones. The Quillen's precision served her well. Her movements were calculated, efficient. She was learning, adapting to the tool failure. But progress came slowly. Her training had never emphasized primitive methods. "She will survive," Ross said to her assistant, a young Quillen named Porter. "But observe how difficult adaptation becomes when one has only known advanced tools." Porter's antennae drooped. "Should we not extract her? She is suffering. She is learning. There is a difference." Ross switched to another feed. "Gren, however, requires monitoring. His condition concerns me." The Bren sat beside a muddy pool, his skin dangerously dry and cracked. He had finally drunk from an unfiltered source 2 days ago. Now illness ravaged him. His multi-tool lay abandoned in the mud, forgotten. He needed extraction soon, or he might not recover. Lux's feed showed the crystalline being huddled in a cave. They had survived, but barely. Their body had adapted to the desert environment, but without tools to work with, they could only endure. No progress, no improvement, just existence. Pollen had injured 2 limbs trying to move a boulder using brute force instead of leverage. They lay in their crude shelter, supplies dwindling, unable to work effectively. The 47 tools that were supposed to solve everything had become an anchor. Too heavy to carry, too broken to use, too complex to repair without the right parts. Then Ross switched to Ben's feed. Porter made a clicking sound of amazement. "How is this possible?" "He possesses only the single blade." "Watch closely," Ross said. "This is what we must understand." On screen, Ben worked in the rain. He had carved a wooden bowl from a tree burl, using the knife to hollow it out bit by bit. Now he used that bowl to collect rainwater from a bark channel he'd mounted on his shelter. The water ran clean and clear. He added hot stones from his fire, heating the water, then dropped in wild greens he'd tested carefully over the past 3 days. The testing process showed on earlier footage. Ben had rubbed each plant on his skin first, waiting for reaction, then on his lips, then chewing and spitting, finally small amounts swallowed. Methodical, patient, no scanner required. Just observation and time. He had built a smoking rack and was preserving fish for the weeks ahead. He'd woven a basket from reeds to carry supplies. He'd made a better knife from a long piece of sharp stone, using the metal knife as a tool to shape it. Now he had 2 blades, both sharp, both useful for different tasks. "He is not merely surviving," Ross observed. "He is establishing permanent infrastructure. Each day makes him stronger, not weaker." Ben finished his soup and set the bowl aside. He picked up a partially carved piece of wood. Over the past 2 days, he'd been shaping it into a trap mechanism. The design was ancient, something humans had used for thousands of years. A figure 4 trigger that would release a weighted log when disturbed. With several of these deployed, he could catch larger game without risk to himself. His knife moved in careful strokes, removing thin shavings. The wood took shape gradually. No rushing. No forcing. Just steady progress. This was the rhythm of real survival. Not dramatic solutions, but consistent effort. That evening, Ben built a proper fire reflector. He drove stakes into the ground behind his fire pit, then woven green branches between them into a tight wall. When he started his fire, the wall reflected heat directly into his shelter opening. The temperature inside rose by at least 15 degrees. He had also dug a small pit lined with stones near the fire. Before sleeping, he filled this with hot coals and covered it with dirt. The radiant heat would last until morning, warming the ground where he slept. Simple physics, simple solutions. On day 9, Ben expanded his camp. He used his stone axe to fell a medium-sized tree, chopping from both sides until it crashed down. Then he limbed it and split the trunk lengthwise using wooden wedges and his mallet. The planks became a raised platform inside his shelter, lifting him off the cold ground. More comfortable, more insulated. Better sleep meant better recovery meant better work capacity. He carved spoons and spatulas for cooking. He made a better container for his knife sharpening stones, keeping them dry and organized. He built a tripod over his fire for hanging cooking vessels. Each improvement built on the last. Each tool enabled the next. By day 10, Ben had created what could only be called a homestead. Tessa finally got a weak fire burning using her manual methods. Gren received emergency extraction, unconscious from dehydration and bacterial infection. Lux continued their minimal existence. Pollen remained injured and immobile. Ross called a meeting with the Academy leadership. We must discuss what the human is demonstrating. This has implications beyond a simple survival test. He is lucky, one instructor said. The electromagnetic storm disabled the other's equipment. Yet it did not affect him at all, Ross countered. His tool requires no power, no circuitry, no complex systems. This is not luck. This is design philosophy we never considered. Primitive design, another instructor said dismissively. Ross turned to the main screen, showing Ben fashioning a fishing net from plant fibers he'd processed over 3 days. Observe his methods. The knife does not perform 47 functions, but it enables 4,000 functions. It does not solve problems. It creates the capacity to solve problems. Do you understand the difference? Silence filled the room. Our species evolved to specialize, Ross continued. We created specific tools for specific tasks. Efficiency through precision. But humans evolved differently. They created simple tools that allowed them to adapt to any situation. Efficiency through flexibility. We never recognized this as a valid approach because our own thinking prevented us from seeing it. On screen, Ben completed his net. He tested the weave, pulling at different points, ensuring strength. Then he walked to the stream and set it in a narrow channel between rocks. By morning, he would have more fish than he could eat. Not because of advanced technology, but because of understanding, patience, and a 10-inch piece of steel that helped him make everything else he needed. The storm came on day 14 without warning. Ben was checking his snare line when the sky turned the color of old bruises. Wind hit the forest like a physical force. Trees bent and groaned. He ran back to camp, securing everything that could blow away. The rain arrived in sheets so thick he could barely see 5 feet ahead. Water rose quickly in the stream. Ben had built his shelter high enough to avoid flooding, but the noise was incredible. Thunder shook the ground. Lightning turned everything white for brief, terrible moments. He sat inside his shelter, adding wood to the fire, keeping it alive against the damp air that crept through every gap. Something screamed in the forest. Not the wind. Something alive. Ben grabbed his spear and knife, moving to the shelter entrance. Through the rain, he saw them. 5 creatures that looked like wolves but larger, with 6 legs and too many teeth. They were running from the flooding stream, and his camp sat directly in their path. The lead creature spotted him. It stopped head low, showing fangs. The others spread out in a loose circle. Ben's heart hammered, but his hand stayed steady. His grandfather's voice echoed in memory. Stay calm. Animals smell fear. They also respect confidence. Ben stepped out into the rain, making himself larger. He had built a defensive perimeter 3 days ago. Sharpened stakes driven into the ground at angles around his camp. The creatures would have to cross that barrier to reach him. But stakes might not be enough against 6-legged wolf things driven by floodwater and fear. The lead creature growled, a sound that vibrated through Ben's chest. It took a step forward. Ben raised his spear, pointing it directly at the creature's face. With his other hand, he grabbed a long piece of wood he'd prepared for this exact situation. Smooth bark wrapped around bone fragments. He swung it against a tree trunk. The bone fragments rattled violently, creating a noise like nothing in nature. The creatures jumped back, confused. Ben did it again, louder. The sound cut through the storm, foreign and frightening. He used the knife then, slashing a long cut in his palm. Blood ran down his arm. He smeared it on the stakes around his camp, marking territory. The scent would tell the creatures this ground was claimed, defended. Combined with the strange noise, it might be enough. The lead creature tested the perimeter, approaching one of the stakes. Ben threw a burning branch from his fire. It landed between them, hissing in the rain but still showing flame. The creature backed away. For 10 minutes they circled. Ben kept moving, making noise, throwing fire, keeping himself visible. His wounded hand throbbed, but he ignored it. Blood was tactical. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. Finally, the creatures moved on. They vanished into the forest, seeking easier shelter. Ben stood in the rain for another 20 minutes, making sure they were truly gone. Only then did he return to his shelter and wrap his hand with clean cloth. Across the planet, Tessa faced her own crisis. Water poured into her highland shelter from 3 directions. She had rebuilt the walls using stones, but her construction technique was flawed. Too many gaps. Water found every weakness. Within an hour, her camp was flooded. She abandoned it, carrying her broken multi-tool and climbing higher into the rocks. The electromagnetic storm had ended days ago, and some functions had returned, but not enough. Her shelter-building laser could manage short bursts, but nothing sustained. She used it to cut a small alcove in the rock face, just deep enough to keep rain off her back. Cold settled into her body. Quillan physiology handled temperature variations better than some species, but constant wet and wind pushed her limits. She activated her emergency beacon, then canceled it. Giving up meant failure. She had to adapt. The human had adapted. Why couldn't she? Tessa looked at her multi-tool. 47 functions, but most required full power. She had been trained to use technology, not to work around its limitations. The human had no such dependency. His knife never needed charging, never glitched, never failed because of atmospheric conditions. She made a decision that felt like betrayal to her entire educational background. Using her partially functional laser, she cut a piece from her multi-tool's outer casing. The metal was sharp on one edge, not as sharp as a proper blade, but enough. She began to carve a piece of wood she found, trying to shape it into something useful. The movements felt clumsy, wrong. But she continued. Lux extracted themselves voluntarily on day 15. Their crystalline structure couldn't handle the moisture from the storm. Medical team arrived within hours, pulling them from Daran 7 before permanent damage occurred. No shame in it. Their biology simply wasn't suited to this world. Some matches were poor regardless of tools or skill. Pollen requested extraction on day 16. 2 injured limbs and dwindling supplies left them no choice. They had survived but not thrived. The test revealed that having many tools meant nothing if you couldn't use them when they failed. Only Ben and Tessa remained. Ben spent day 15 repairing storm damage. Several stakes had been torn loose by the wind. His drying rack had collapsed. The smoking rack needed reinforcement. He worked methodically, fixing each problem. His injured hand slowed him down but didn't stop him. He'd wrapped it properly, keeping it clean. By evening, everything was restored and stronger than before. He also harvested materials from downed trees. The storm had toppled several large ones, providing wood that would have taken him hours to cut otherwise. He dragged sections back to camp, already planning what to build next. A real table, better storage containers, perhaps a second shelter for food storage to keep scavengers away from his living space. The creatures returned on day 17. Ben heard them before dawn, moving through the forest. They kept their distance this time, respecting the marked territory. But they were watching, learning. He would need to stay alert. He reinforced his perimeter with more stakes and added a secondary barrier using thorny bushes he transplanted from a nearby area. The thorns were vicious, 3 inches long and slightly curved. He wore thick hide gloves while handling them, working for hours to create a living fence that would grow stronger over time. In orbit, Ross watched both remaining contestants. Tessa was carving something, her movements improving each day. She had fashioned a crude knife and was using it to strip bark, make cordage, improve her shelter. Progress was slow but visible. She is learning the human way, Porter observed. She is learning that there are many ways, Ross corrected. Technology is not evil. Specialization is not wrong. But dependency on any single approach creates vulnerability. The human understands this instinctively. We must teach it deliberately. Ben's feed showed him checking traps. 3 snares had caught small game. His net held 2 large fish. He had more food than he needed, so he continued smoking and preserving everything. Preparation for weeks 3 and 4. Thinking ahead. Planning beyond immediate needs. That evening, Ben sat by his fire and carved a new tool. A draw knife shaped from stone with handles on both ends. It would let him strip bark and shape wood faster than his regular knife. Another tool made by the first tool. The cycle continued, expanding his capabilities with each addition. He looked up at the stars, wondering how the others had fared. He hoped they were safe. This wasn't a competition to him. It was a test of different philosophies. His had worked for his species for tens of thousands of years. Maybe theirs would too, given time to adapt. Maybe the galaxy had room for many approaches. The knife rested beside him, reflecting firelight, 10 inches of simple steel. No power source, no complex mechanisms, just metal shaped by skill and sharpened by patience. It had helped him build everything around him: shelter, tools, weapons, security, comfort. Not because it was advanced, but because it was versatile. Not because it solved everything, but because it enabled him to solve anything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight Ben was warm, fed, and safe. That was enough. Day 23 found Ben working on his most ambitious project yet. He had been carving for 3 days straight, working with a large piece of hardwood he'd found in the forest. The grain was perfect, dense and straight. His knife had stripped away the rough exterior, revealing beautiful golden wood underneath. He was making a proper bow. Not the crude hunting bow he'd fashioned in the first week, but a real weapon. The kind his grandfather would have called a work of art. Each stroke of the knife revealed more of the shape hidden in the wood. The curve emerged gradually, perfectly balanced. He used heat from his fire to help bend the wood, checking the tension constantly. The project required patience and precision. Rushing would crack the wood and waste days of work. So Ben took his time, testing each adjustment, feeling how the wood responded. His injured hand had healed well. The scar would remain, but function had returned completely. Around his camp, evidence of 3 weeks' work was everywhere. The original shelter now had a proper door, woven from branches and covered with bark. Inside, a raised bed kept him off the ground. Storage boxes held preserved food, materials, and tools. He had carved eating utensils, cooking implements, and working tools. A separate storage structure stood 10 feet from the main shelter. Ben had built it on stilts to keep animals out. It held smoked meat, dried fish, and preserved vegetables, enough food to last another month if needed. He had learned from his grandfather that abundance shared was better than scarcity hoarded. But out here, preparation meant survival. His knife had grown dull from constant use. Every evening, Ben spent time sharpening it on increasingly fine stones. The blade was smaller than when he arrived, worn down by 3 weeks of hard work, but it remained sharp and functional. When he returned to the orbital station, he would retire this knife properly. It had earned rest. The monitoring drone captured all of this. In the observation room, a group had gathered. Ross had invited several academy leaders and representatives from multiple species. They watched in silence as Ben worked. "This is day 23, Ross said. The human has not only survived but thrived. His caloric intake is actually higher than his pre-deployment baseline. He has gained muscle mass. His psychological indicators show no stress. He is healthier now than when he arrived." One of the observers, a Bren official, clicked his throat nervously. But Gren nearly died. "Our species is not suited to primitive methods." Gren nearly died because his tool failed and he possessed no backup skills. Ross replied firmly, but not unkindly. The human would have thrived with Gren's multi-tool as well. The difference is not species capability. The difference is approach to problem-solving. She switched feeds to show Tessa. The Quillen had made remarkable progress. Her shelter was crude compared to what her technology could have built, but it was solid. She had fire. She had water. She had food from traps she'd built using methods observed from the human's feed, which the drones transmitted to her emergency beacon for educational purposes. Tessa requested access to the human's footage, Ross explained. I granted it. Observe what happened when a trained mind applied itself to learning new methods rather than mourning lost tools. Tessa sat by her fire, carving. Her movements had become smooth, confident. She had made her own knife from salvaged metal and sharpened it carefully. Around her lay several tools she'd created. A bow drill for fire starting, fishing hooks, cordage. She was adapting. I calculate her survival probability at 70% now, Ross said. 3 weeks ago it was 12%. Education changed that calculation. A Horth official chimed softly. Are you suggesting we abandon advanced technology for primitive tools? I am suggesting we teach both, Ross said. Technology amplifies capability, but only if the base capability exists. The human possesses base capability. His technology, crude as we consider it, never fails because it requires no power, no complex systems. It is not superior to our tools. It is complementary. Why did we never teach both approaches? Silence answered her. Because we forgot, Ross continued. Our species have had advanced tools for so long that we forgot the skills underneath them. The humans never forgot. They kept both. They teach survival skills alongside their advanced training. When everything fails, they remain capable. The video showed Ben completing his bow. He strung it carefully, testing the draw weight. Then he made arrows using bird feathers for fletching and careful carving to create straight shafts. Each arrow took an hour to make. He made 6 of them. That evening, a communication drone descended to Ben's camp. Ross's voice emerged from it. Ben Wright, this is Instructor Ross. I am conducting evaluations. Would you answer some questions? Ben looked up from sharpening a new tool. Of course, Instructor. Why did you bring only a knife? Ben considered the question while running the whetstone along the blade edge. Every species here brought a tool that does 47 things. I brought a tool that lets me do 47,000 things. They brought solutions. I brought potential. Explain the difference. A solution is fixed. It solves specific problems in specific ways. Potential is flexible. It adapts to whatever problem appears. Ben held up the knife. This doesn't purify water, but it helped me make containers to boil water. It doesn't provide shelter, but it helped me cut materials to build shelter. It doesn't catch fish, but it helped me carve hooks and spears and arrows. Every other tool I have came from this one. That's not 47 functions. That's infinite functions. Ross's antennae tilted forward, though Ben couldn't see it. Did you expect the electromagnetic storm? No, but I didn't need to expect it. My knife works in any conditions. No power source means no power failure. He paused. How are the others? Gran and Lux were extracted for medical reasons. Pollen requested extraction. Tessa remains and she is learning. Good, she seemed smart. I'm glad she's okay. You show no competitiveness. Why? Ben smiled. This isn't a competition to me. It's a test of methods. Everyone should survive. Everyone should learn. If my approach helps them, that's perfect. If their approach teaches me something, that's perfect too. My grandfather used to say that the best tool is the one that works, regardless of who designed it. The drone was silent for a moment. Then Ross spoke again, her voice carrying something new. Respect. In 3 weeks, you have demonstrated skills my academy has not taught in 500 years. Would you consider remaining after the test? We would benefit from your instruction. I'm not a teacher, Ben said. I'm just a guy who learned from his grandfather. Your grandfather sounds wise. He was. Ben looked at the knife, remembering Hans teaching his younger hands how to hold it properly. He taught me that simple doesn't mean easy, and complex doesn't mean better. He taught me to understand what I need versus what I want, and he taught me that the most important tool isn't the one in your hand. It's the one in your head. Ross made a clicking sound of acknowledgement. I will remember that. The extraction comes in 7 days. Are you prepared? I am, but I'll miss this place a little. It's peaceful once you stop fighting it and start working with it. The drone departed. Ben returned to his work. He was making a new knife from stone, using his metal knife to shape it. Soon he would have 3 cutting tools, each one different. Each one useful for specific tasks. Specialization and versatility working together. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that one approach was better, but that both had value. The stars came out. Ben banked his fire and entered his shelter. 7 more days. Then he would return to the orbital station. He wondered what came next, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight he had everything he needed. The extraction shuttle touched down exactly on schedule. Day 30 had arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Ben stood beside his camp, pack-ready, knife at his belt. He had spent the morning carefully dismantling his shelters and returning materials to the forest. Leave no trace, his grandfather had taught him. Take only memories and knowledge. Tessa's shuttle landed in the Highland Zone an hour later. She emerged carrying her broken multi-tool, but also several items she had made. A stone knife, cordage, a fire-starting kit. Her carapace showed wear from 30 days of hard work, but her movements were steady and confident. She had survived. The medical team checked both of them immediately upon return to the orbital station. Ben's results shocked the attending physician. Your muscle mass has increased by 8%. Bone density is higher. Cardiovascular function is improved. How is this possible? Hard work and good food, Ben said simply. Turns out survival training is great exercise. Tessa's results showed weight loss and some minor deficiencies, but nothing serious. She had adapted enough to maintain health. The doctor cleared her and she immediately asked to speak with Ben. They met in a common area overlooking Darren 7. Tessa's antennae curled in what Ben had learned was a gesture of respect. I watched your methods through the emergency educational feed. You saved my life, human Ben, right? You saved your own life by learning, Ben replied. I just showed you what was possible. My training was incomplete. I see that now. Tessa placed her homemade stone knife on the table between them. This blade cut my shelter poles, processed my food, carved my tools. It is crude compared to my multi-tool, but it never failed. I understand why you brought only a knife. The knife was just the beginning, Ben said. You could have brought anything and done the same as long as you understood the principle underneath. What principle? That tools serve you. You don't serve tools. When your multi-tool failed, you thought you had nothing. But you had yourself. Your intelligence. Your hands. Your ability to learn. Those are the real tools. Everything else is just assistance. Tessa was quiet for a long moment. We Quillen pride ourselves on efficiency and preparation. We plan for every scenario. But we never planned for the scenario where our plans fail. Your species plans differently. We plan for adaptation, Ben agreed, because we know we can't predict everything. So we learn principles instead of procedures, skills instead of solutions. The certification ceremony took place that evening. The Academy chamber was filled with observers from across the galaxy. Word had spread about the human and his knife. Everyone wanted to see the results. Instructor Ross stood at the podium. 30 days ago, 5 contestants deployed to Duran 7. Today, 2 return having completed the full challenge. But this test revealed something more important than individual success. It revealed a gap in our educational philosophy. She activated the main screen, showing footage from all 5 contestants. Observe what happened when advanced technology failed. 4 contestants with sophisticated tools struggled because their training emphasized tool operation over fundamental skills. 1 contestant with a primitive tool thrived because his training emphasized principles over procedures. The footage showed Ben building his camp, creating tools, solving problems. Then it showed Tessa's transformation as she learned to do the same. The contrast was clear. Ben Wright of Earth receives the highest certification marks in Academy history, Ross announced, not because his tool was superior, but because his approach was adaptable. He demonstrated that survival is not about having the right equipment. It is about having the right mindset. Applause filled the chamber. Ben stood, accepting the recognition with quiet humility. Tessa of Quilla received certification with distinction, Ross continued. She demonstrated the ability to learn and adapt under extreme pressure. When her primary methods failed, she developed new ones. This is the mark of a true survivor. More applause. Tessa's antennae swept upward with pride. The Academy will implement immediate curriculum changes, Ross said. We will continue teaching advanced survival technology, but we will also teach fundamental skills. Skills that work without power, without complex systems. Skills that our ancestors knew but we have forgotten. She looked directly at Ben. And we request that Ben Wright remain as our first guest instructor, to teach us what humans know about survival. The chamber erupted in discussion. Ben stood and approached the podium. Ross stepped aside, giving him the floor. I'm honored, Ben said, but I'm not special. Any human trained in wilderness survival could have done what I did. We have thousands of instructors on Earth who could teach these skills. What you need isn't one person. You need an exchange program. Bring your students to Earth. Let them learn from multiple teachers, and send Earth students here. Let them learn your methods. Both approaches have value. Ross's antennae tilted thoughtfully. You suggest we combine our knowledge? I suggest we stop thinking in terms of primitive versus advanced and start thinking in terms of complementary approaches, Ben said. Your multi-tools are amazing. If I'd had one that worked, I would have used it happily, but I also had backup skills. Why not teach both? Give people advanced tools and the knowledge to work without them. Then they're prepared for anything. A Bren official stood. Our species nearly lost Gren because we emphasized technology over fundamental skills. Perhaps the human is correct. We should teach both. A Horth chimed agreement. Our people have forgotten how to work without sensors and analysis tools. This creates vulnerability. We should address this. The discussion continued for hours. By the end, a consensus emerged. The Galactic Survival Academy would partner with Earth's wilderness schools. Students from all species would learn both advanced and fundamental survival techniques. The goal was to create survivors who could thrive with any tools or no tools. 3 months later, Ben led his first mixed species expedition back to Daran 7. 12 students from 6 different species, including Tessa. Each carried both a multi-tool and a simple knife. Each had trained in both technological and fundamental approaches. The first night, Ben sat by the fire teaching them how to carve a bow drill set. His students worked carefully, using their knives to shape the wood. Some were clumsy, others showed natural talent. All of them were learning. Tessa had become his assistant instructor. She demonstrated the process with her own knife, the one she'd made during her original test. She had kept it, a reminder of what she had learned. The knife does not make you a survivor, she told the students, echoing Ben's words. The knife helps you become a survivor. Your mind, your determination, your willingness to learn and adapt, these make you a survivor. The knife is just assistance. One student, a young Drevny, struggled with his carving. Ben knelt beside him. Don't force it. Let the knife do the work. Feel how the wood wants to split. Work with it, not against it. The student tried again, more gently. The wood began to shape properly. He made a clicking sound of satisfaction. Later, Ben walked to the edge of camp and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, more humans were living their lives, most of them never knowing about this place or what had happened here. But the lesson would spread. Human survival skills would become part of galactic education, and maybe alien survival skills would teach Earth something new too. Ross approached from the darkness. You are thinking deeply. Just remembering my grandfather, Ben said. He taught me everything I know. I wish he could see this. Perhaps he does, Ross said gently. In a way. His knowledge lives through you. You pass it to others. They will pass it further. This is how wisdom survives across generations. Ben touched the knife at his belt, not the original, which he had retired to a place of honor in his home. This was a new knife, but the same design. Simple, reliable, ready for anything. My grandfather used to say that the best tool is the one that works when everything else fails, Ben said. But he also said that the best tool is the one you know how to use. Maybe both things are true. Both things are true, Ross agreed. This is what we are teaching now. Technology and technique, knowledge and skill, advanced and fundamental. Together they create something stronger than either alone. Back at the fire, students laughed as someone's bow drill finally produced smoke. The sound of success echoed through the forest. New survivors learning old skills, old species learning new perspectives. Different approaches finding common ground. Ben smiled and returned to the fire. His students needed him. Tomorrow they would learn to build shelters. The next day, water purification. After that, toolmaking. Week by week, skill by skill, they would learn what humans had known for thousands of years. That survival was not about having the perfect tool, but about being able to use any tool perfectly. The knife rested in its sheath ready when needed. But tonight it could rest. Tonight was for teaching, learning, and sharing knowledge under alien stars. And that, Ben thought, was exactly what his grandfather would have wanted.